Okay, hello, good morning. It is me. I'm just out of shot because I'm not sure how to do this whole making video. So yeah, this is going to be a Daddy Bear mug, possibly from beginning to end. We'll have to see. As you can see, I have got, this is the wall of my mug here. Now this is possibly just that little bit too dry at the moment, but this is kind of sort of leather hard. It needs to be able to be sort of flexible without breaking. I've got a disc here which is really quite tough. This is the base. I have a foot ring which gets applied on there. It'll all start to come together, and then here I have the handles. Okay, so that's it. Those are the parts which all get stuck together. Okay, so this is it's just a very simple biscuit-fired clay stamp, and this kind of goes in the middle of a handle there. I'm just going to leave that. I don't know whether you can see that. That's all that is. I don't want to say that's all anything is really, because I don't want to undermine what's going on, but that's basically it for the handle at the moment. The handle goes on absolutely last because everything else needs to be pretty much dry. Okay, so pottery is a lot to do with preparing the clay. This has obviously been rolled out and cut to size already, and then it's about kind of compression, just getting the composition of the clay to sort of understand that you want it to move, but also that you want it to kind of bond in a certain way. It's all molecular and sciencey stuff. I'm not going to pretend to understand it, but yeah, that's basically it. And I'm doing it on a piece of paper just because it has a tendency to stick. Same thing here for the foot ring, not the foot ring, the base. I haven't scripted this, as if you couldn't tell. So yeah, as I say, this is possibly just that little bit tough. It's important when you're trying to connect clay that it remains the same sort of consistency, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so when I say it's not going to work, I mean there's more chance of it failing. You basically need to cement things together, and if there's moisture, a disparity between the moisture level in the different parts, between the wall here and then the base here, it can make life more difficult. Okay, so I'm going to put on my maker's mark. I always find this bit quite exciting because it's the start of the transformation. So there you go, there's a little, can you see? There you go, perfect. Now I'm going to scratch and score around here to add moisture back in, and then I will do the same along the edge of here and also up a seam and a seam here, and then we'll try and stick it all together. That's kind of the slightly messy, nerve-wracking bit. So what I've done off camera is I've added moisture to the seams. I've also kind of broken it up a little bit, so just used a very sort of simple scratching tool to allow the water to penetrate. It's a tricky one because if the clay is too wet, it becomes very difficult to handle. If it's too dry, it can tend to break. So this little gizmo here, this sort of does the job of just kind of creating a bit of a surface for it to purchase. I've done the same to my slab. I don't know whether you can see that along the bottom there and up the seam. So that's kind of all ready to go. I've used a combination of dirty water. This is literally just dirty water. It doesn't have to be dirty, it can be clean, but I'm not that good. And then in here we've got slip, which is just clay trimmings that have been mixed into, sorry, I never really know where the camera is, into this kind of cementy sludge thing. So you're trying to get those seams to realise that they're not as dry as they thought they were, and they are about to undergo a slight transformation. So I've switched down to some natural light because there's a lot of glare on the wheel. The base of the mug is obviously the maker's mark is underneath. It's on a bit of paper to stop it sticking to my banding wheel here. And now we hope that we can introduce the two elements together. Excellent. So pottery is a two-handed exercise. So I'm going to you'll have to bear with me while I kind of get this started. Okay, so there's enough bend in the wall to go round, trying to make sure that that seam at the base is tight. Also make sure that the wall is all the way down, and then you'll see we end up with a seam here. You need an overlap, not a massive overlap, just enough. So what we've got there is a good start. So yeah, doesn't look like a mug yet though. So it's just a slab wrapped around a circular base. So you do need a bit of an overlap, because this is kind of, any joint is a point of weakness. So I'm going to have to turn it around and do it my way. So I'm trying to just pinch this together. Now I can feel that the clay is a little drier than I'd want it to be. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that I might want to introduce a little bit more moisture at some point. So you see, it's not, I mean, it's not beautiful, not yet, but it will be. Just going to put a little bit of extra moisture on the inside of that seam, and then I'm going to use this little fella. It's just, I'm not sure what it is, I found it on the internet. It's one of those random things you find on the internet, and I'm just going to push in the opposite direction to the way I pushed on the outside. So I'm trying to get the two bits to sort of layer over. Now this seam needs to be very good, but this isn't the only chance you get to kind of cement it. So on the outside here, because on the inside I smoothed the clay that way, on the outside I want to smooth it that way. So I will just rub that one down there. That compression that we talked about at the beginning is kind of important all the way through. Okay, and you see that seam is now almost gone. Now because the clay is slightly too dry, I've got a little bit of breakage up there, which is not something we want. If you don't address these tiny little cracks, they will just get worse. So I'm using a little bit of tatty old sponge and a little bit of water. Just kind of go round, and it will help bring enough moisture into that seam to sort of bring it together. Okay, it's just something to watch out for. It's based on weather conditions. So yesterday was very breezy and very warm in Berwick, as it always is. So the clay tended to go off a little bit quicker. I was going to make yesterday, but then I was persuaded to do this makers video, so here we are. Okay, so that seam, that's kind of, it's okay for now. It's not perfect. If you have a look, the profile is not brilliant, but what we've got to do now is address the base. That is not the way we want it to look. For a functional piece of pottery, you want to make sure that, well, you don't want tea leaking out. So you can see sort of where the seam here, that just needs pushing together. Now, I found that one of my old kitchen paddles is the best thing to do for this. Try not to push down on here, because obviously it'll just sink down. So just sort of paddle it in a little bit. This way I think you introduce a short, sharp sort of blast of pressure without actually crushing it too much. And then what I like to do is I just like to roll it along the spoon like that. Okay, so most of those gaps have now sort of closed up, but it doesn't look pretty. So what we get is one of our little kidneys, and this might be tricky for you to see, but I'm going to smooth this edge in. Okay, so it's another form of compression. You'll have to see it this way because I don't know how to do it one-handed with a camera, and then I'll show you what the end result looks like. So bearing in mind everything is still relatively soft, you're just going to go in and smooth that edge in a little bit so that you can't see any holes, and then hopefully if you can't see them, they aren't there. Always kind of pushing from the outside in, and then you end up with something that looks a little bit like that. Okay, I don't know whether that's, will this light help? No, not at all. Yeah. just going to tidy up a little bit. The more tidying you do when it's wet or not dry, not quite wet, the less handling you have to do later, the less sort of trimming and stuff. So I'm going to get my slightly damp sponge again, just come around there. So you end up with a base that looks like that. Right? Quite happy with that. Now I'm just going to have to pay some attention to the bottom seam. Where's the light? In there. Make sure that that's kind of nice and tight and sealed. And then I'm also going to do a little bit more on this inner seam here, which you can still sort of see. Most of my slab pots, you can see that seam. I did spend quite a bit of time trying to pretend that they weren't made of slabs. It just wasn't worth it. So yeah, let's give that a go. You have to be fairly dexterous for this because you're reaching inside and trying to push that seam from the inside out. So you have to be mindful that you're asking the clay to do an awful lot. If you see again around here, I'm just starting to get another tiny little hairline thing, so I'll probably do that thing with the water and the sponge again in a minute just to make sure that that is properly sealed. I'm also, since you're here, just going to get some more slip, push that down into that bottom seam. Okay, that's a construction area. You don't want anything particularly rough and ready. So yeah, even once this is kind of air dried, we're still going to have to finesse it, and we can get rid of any sort of rough edges and things to make it a really enjoyable tactile piece. I always use paper because it sometimes sticks. Okay, so yeah, that's what we've got so far. Alright, cool. So at this point, it's all starting to look quite good. Just cleaning off, this is a slightly more rigid kidney. And then all I'm going to do, try and get my pot sort of into the middle of my banding wheel. Bearing in mind it's still got quite a lot of flexibility, I'm going to try to, sorry, just got to get some clay off there. Try to pull up from the base to the rim in a sort of steady swipe. So you kind of come up and hopefully, I don't know whether this will be picked up on my very professional iPhone camera, you'll start to see that there's just quite a nice sort of pleasing linear look to this as it goes round. Now any of those bits of the clay which were very dry, you're now kind of encouraging them to get all cozy with their neighbours, so it should reduce the chance of it splitting. Now as I say, the clay that I'm using today for this wall is a little bit too dry, and I feel at risk because I'm trying to maybe concentrate a bit too much on what you can see rather than what the clay needs. But hey, such is life. Okay, so I apologise for all the lighting changes, but this is not a proper studio setup. This is me in my kitchen, which is at the moment where all of my pots are made. So we've got, where are you? My camera's wonky, my pot isn't, I promise. We've got the basic shape, you know, we've got rather nicely attached base, and we've gone up the sides. I might just do that again. You have to remember that everywhere that you've put additional water and slip is now a point of weakness. So it's a bit softer around the base here, and it's a bit soft up the seam here, which hopefully you're starting to struggle to see. So this time when I come up, I'm going to push a little bit more at the base and then try and relieve the pressure, because if I apply the same pressure here as I do down here, I'm going to push the sides of my mug in, and no one wants that. In fact, I might just quickly do the base separately, so you get an idea of, that's kind of where the clay is softer. That's the seam that I've made between the two separate pieces of slab. That's what I want to kind of stick together. I'm just going to come up again, just try to make the surface finish as good as possible. You don't really want to come back and have to start fiddling about with the surface. You can push a little bit more where you feel it's sort of bowing out. It is still relatively flexible. It's one of the hardest things that I sort of learnt was what you can and can't do with it. So that's quite a nice look. You can actually see that seam there. So what I might do is I might just give that a bit more of a push in, so when you turn the wheel it's less obvious. I'm also just going to go around the top there, make sure that's relatively nice and level. And now I'm going to use a softer rib, more of a flexible rubber rib here, and I'm just going to, this isn't, I'm using my other hand, I'm just going to tidy up a little bit in there. Now we can finesse the top of the vessel later, but like I say, anything that you can do now means you don't have to mess around with it too much later. And in doing that, you can actually feel it kind of comes out where the rim is distorted with that seam. So, and it's one of those little sort of con tricks. You don't necessarily have to hide the seam all the way down. If you've got a rim that looks circular, it can kind of deceive the eye into thinking that the whole vessel has got more of a circular profile. I'm just going to grab my little wet sponge and just go over that to soften some of the edges. And that's pretty much it for now. What we need to do is to wait until it's dried quite substantially, and then we will go back in and apply the foot ring, and then much later we will have to put on the handle. But that's stage one. Okay.